Thank you, Dr. Gold. I will not debunk anything, but I am going to try to provide clarity for a very important topic that's been in the media over the past year regarding contamination in consumer products. And I think it's important for dermatologists to know the facts, why it is what it is, and how to communicate it to peers and to patients. I will not cause an electrical failure. There we go. So the truth is that drug or product quality is a very serious and growing concern, and we see this in different types of media publications. You can see on the left, the Bloomberg has talked about, can you trust generics? New York Times, what's wrong with our drug supply? Is it sick? How do we fix it? And you can see on the far right, bottle of lies. What's the real secrets behind the generic drug boom? And it's important for everyone to understand, from provider to patient, that all ingredients can be impactful, right? So the quote here is that the premise that every innovator and generic product is of equal quality is demonstrably false. And illustrated in the upper left are lisinopril brand and 5 different generics. They are not the same. Articles have been published about inactive ingredients, may not be inert, what you don't know about generic drugs, how does it hurt you? So there's a number of topics in the media that patients are coming into us and asking us, what do we think and what's the truth? So I want to touch on benzene because that's been probably the biggest noisemaker over the past year. It's without a doubt benzene. It's a hazardous industrial solvent. It's been used in pharma production for a long time, but banned in some industries. It's a well-known contaminant in petroleum industry, but it's very toxic to human health and the environment. And this toxicity goes back to 1897, where petroleum workers were exposed to benzene, and it was shown to have a link to leukemia. And it's been also shown that it's toxic to marine life at the level of parts per billion. There's a number of studies that have pointed to this risk correlation. So in the upper left, it states any concentration of benzene greater than 0 is not safe. In the bottom left, there is probably no safe level of exposure to benzene. And on the right, we see that benzene exposure was strongly related to leukemia risk. And this is the important part, with increased risk starting at around 0.8 to 1.6 part per million. So I want you to keep in the back of your mind 1.6 part per million. So what do the regulatory agencies say about benzene? So in the upper left, both the Department of Health and Human Services and CDC state benzene causes cancer in humans. In the lower left, the World Health Organization states benzene is a group 1 known human carcinogen. In the same category as asbestos. How many people here, show me your hands if you would send your child to school with a known asbestos problem? I don't see any hands going up because we as children had to live through our schools. I remember my school being closed and stripped of asbestos. In the upper right, the Occupational Safety and Health Organization limits to exposure to 0.1 part per million. And in the bottom right, your EPA, drinking water, it says 0.005 parts per million, which is 5 parts per billion, with a goal of 0. And in short-term exposure for children, a limit of 0.2 parts per million. So that brings us to a company called Valisure. So Valisure is an independent drug quality and safety company actually located in New Haven, Connecticut, which is where Yale University is. And the way I got involved, and I have no financial relationships to Valisure whatsoever, Valisure approached me to review their FDA citizen petition that they filed, I believe, back in May of last year, and that's shown here on the left. In this petition, they had examined 300, roughly, unique batches of sunscreen. And they found, and that included 69 different brands of sunscreen and after sun care products. 78 had detectable benzene. 26 had levels between 0.1 and 2 parts per million. And 14 had benzene over 2 parts per million. Now, I told you to remember that number, 1.6 part per million. And so, naturally, this created a lot of news. So in the lower right, Bloomberg News, talked about sunscreen with leukemia causing benzene is the latest summer worry. I will, if anyone from Dermatology Times is here, I'll shout out to Dermatology Times because they are actually the company that broke the news story. So why is this important? Why is this a big deal? So it actually dates back to an NIH-funded study from both 2019 and 2020. I'm only showing the 2020 paper here because that was the more recent study. But this was out of a group, PI David Strauss, who was asked to look at, through randomized clinical trial, the absorbance of sunscreen, chemical sunscreens into the blood. So I want you to pay attention to the rigorous design of this study. So on the left side here where it says interventions, sunscreen, participants were randomized to 1 of 4 sunscreens, and the product was applied 2 milligrams per centimeter squared to 75% of the body surface area, which you probably should be doing if you're going out to the beach here, at 0 hours on day 1, and then 4 times a day, day 2 through day 4. So almost a real-life situation if you're at the beach in Miami. They took 34 blood samples over 21 days from each participant. That's a tough study. Now, in the upper right, what did they find? I have it underlined there. The maximum plasma concentrations of all 6 active ingredients, and you can see the 6 chemical ingredients there that were in these sunscreens, were greater than 0.5 nanograms per milliliter. And this threshold was surpassed on day 1, okay? Day 1. Now, why is this important? So in the bottom, these plasma concentrations surpassed the FDA threshold for requirement of additional safety studies. And because no prior studies had shown this, these products never had to go through that extra safety. So the point of this study is that, wow, now these products need this extra safety based on the FDA guidelines and thresholds. So naturally, this news from Valisure created a lot of recalls. You've heard you had Coppertone and Neutrogena, and they recalled some of their sunscreen products. And the benzene was not limited to sprays, although sprays seem to be the biggest culprit. Creams, lotions, as well as mineral-based and chemical-based sunscreens all had problems. But what I'm going to show you on the next slide, no one in the public has seen, because we obtained this from a Freedom of Information Act request to get Johnson & Johnson's internal findings of why they recalled their sunscreen. And what you saw was J&J's own internal analysis. The levels of benzene were 11.2 to 23.6 parts per million, 2 to 4-fold higher than Valishure's highest level of 6.26 part per million benzene for Neutrogena. This did not make it into the public realm. Why is this happening? Valisure showed that the contamination in sunscreen, it is truly a contamination. It is not a breakdown of the chemical ingredients. And where is it coming from? This is a diagram showing supply chain. And the first 2 columns on the left are outsourced internationally. With a supply chain this complex, it's very difficult to control where some of the ingredients to create propellants and sprays or other types of vehicles needed for these sunscreens come from. So I was quoted, because I was quoted in the Valisure FDA citizen petition, I was asked to comment by some of these news organizations, and I made this statement about a year ago. What about the other things that we're applying? Moisturizers, skin creams, makeup. Is the manufacturer of those products that different than sunscreens? And then shortly, a few months later, recalls of antifungals and antiperspirants with higher levels of benzene even than in sunscreens. So what's the FDA say about benzene and limits? Well, the FDA says that the benzene is a class 1 solvent and that these solvents should be avoided. It says here, should not be employed, solvents in class 1 should not be employed in the manufacture of drug substances, excipients, and drug products because of their unacceptable toxicity or their deleterious environmental effect. Their use can only be if it's unavoidable to produce the drug product that has a significant therapeutic advance. and the limit is 2 parts per million in that caveat that it has to be unavoidable. But Valisure never said, do not use sunscreens. They said that numerous sunscreens they had did not contain benzene contamination. So why not? So therefore, based on this FDA definition, benzene is not required to make sunscreens. Therefore, there's no justification for it to be in sunscreens because it's not required. Oh, and it said there, the gaps in knowledge. The truth is the FDA has not actually set clear guidelines or limits for exposure to benzene. Now, to be fair and balanced, there was a recent article published in the Journal of the American Academy of Dermatology stating sunscreen use is not associated with increased blood concentrations of benzene among adults in the United States. I don't believe this at all, and I'm going to tell you why. Because the authors state their own limitations in the article. Remember how rigorous the NIH study was that showed the 6 chemical ingredients in most of our sunscreens make it into the blood. Here, they were analyzing this database from 2003 to 2006 and 2009 to 2018. And in this database, there was absolutely zero detail on the last application of sunscreen, the total daily sunscreen use, the body surface area that was used. There was no known timing of the blood draws. And the data sets, one other limitation, they are before. Maybe the contamination in the supply chain has come later. But the point is, this is not even close to the randomized trial the NIH did on the chemical-based sunscreens. Now, some of the critics out there are saying, well, there's many other factors of a way you can get exposed to benzene, from gasoline, secondhand cigarette smoke, and other chemical products. So what about that? So here's taking data from 1994 to 2009 showing that the actual amount of benzene in air is 0.0003 parts per million. In the antiperspirants that were recalled, the levels were 60,000 times higher than that. Hand sanitizer, 50,000 times higher, and in sunscreen, 20,000 times higher. And if you don't think it's a problem, just 2 weeks ago, Banana Boat thought it was enough of a problem that they recalled 3 additional sunscreens because of finding benzene. So what do I tell my patients? I tell my patients that absolutely sunscreens are needed, sunscreens are safe, sunscreens are necessary to prevent skin cancer. It's the right thing to do. However, if you're going to choose a sunscreen, look up Valisure Appendix A, which details which sunscreens have been benzene-free, and go with that, and you can have peace of mind. I think that the contamination it's not just sunscreens, it's all of these personal healthcare products. And the point is that we need to understand it more. There's clearly a lack of really good studies to understand what's happening, what's in the blood, and what the long-term implications are. And so I think that this is something that we need to be aware of and advise our patients in the proper way, that there's data that needs to be figured out. Okay, thank you.